Hello and welcome back to another chat with Matt. Today's topic is, a really important topic on mental fitness and well-being. You'll recall a few months ago, we had our guest today on, Pete Cohen, and we talked about this topic back then. And as we go forward in 2020 and we're experiencing further experiences, if you will, because of the pandemic, this topic is becoming even more important now than it was at the beginning of the year. So what we're going to do today is share with you a presentation that we gave to a recent NHS conference around this topic. And at times you might think, this sounds like it's a salesy podcast. It really isn't. What this is all about is us sharing with you some of the things that we do to help people like you around well-being and mental fitness. Because for us, we're deeply passionate about making sure that people are well, people that are succeeding and happy in their life. And if we can impart that to you, then that's a real positive motivator for us. So let me introduce you without further ado to Pete. Pete, welcome back to the chat.
Thank you, Matt. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today.
How are you today?
Yeah, I'm great, actually. I don't know whether you know that the origins of how are you are actually quite biblical. They mean, how are you with God? And my grandma always said, don't talk about sex, money, religion, or politics. My interpretation of that is, how are you with yourself? You know, what's it like being you? And that is quite a deep conversation to have with people. But let's be brutally honest here. The world is full of people right now that are full of uncertainty and don't feel particularly good. They're scared, they're uncertain. And I really think this is such an important subject that we should be talking about freely, and really look to provide people with solutions to help them with their mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've talked at length around this. I was on a chat actually with a colleague of mine I recorded just yesterday, and he was talking about the fact that he's just picking up the phone to his contacts within LinkedIn now when he sees it's their birthday. And all he's doing is he's phoning them up and saying happy birthday. No other reason, no hidden intent, just to check in with them. And I thought that was a great thing to do.
Well, Martin Luther King said it, many years ago. The most important question we should be asking people is, what can I do for you? How can I help you? And I think, again, there's never been a more important time, because so many people are very, very unclear and confused, and there is a lot of uncertainty in the air at this moment in time. And when there is that in the air, people will struggle mentally, and when you're struggling mentally, life is a lot more difficult than it needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are listening into this podcast, you're not going to be able to see the visuals that we're showing. So what we will do is we'll try and bring a little bit of visualization, if we can, Pete, when we're showing some of these slides. So let's go through this. We've got a few things to show. We've got a few stats and figures. So let's get into this. So let's talk about the reality. We've already touched on this a little bit, but give us a sense of some of these points on this screen in terms of the current reality.
Well, what's fascinating about human beings, I mean, my background is in psychology, and I've always just been obsessed with helping people find solutions for the problems and challenges that they have. But what's fascinating about human beings is we only really get to see the best in people when really bad things happen. And we have seen sides of people that have been amazing. When COVID first hit, you saw people behaving in ways that they perhaps wouldn't normally. But the dangers of coming out of something like that is people are often lost. They don't know now what to do, what to aim for. And there are a lot of people that are confused. They're lost. They're not connected. They're not connected in the way perhaps that they would like to be, not be able to see the people that they want to see. And their motivation levels going up and down, and stress and anxiety is rife. So this is what's going on. And I think people need tools and techniques and strategies to manage this incredibly different time. I don't think any of us were really prepared for this, and the ramifications of it are going to go on for quite a long time.
Yeah, they are indeed. And to what extent do you think some of these manifestations that we're seeing on the screen, confused, lost, less connected, different levels of motivation and stress and anxiety levels are rising, to what extent do you think some of these are being hidden by the fact that we are all working more or less remotely most of the time?
well, these problems have been here for a long time, but what COVID has done is just kind of brought it more to the surface. And it's just interesting because it's one of those subjects that people often don't really like to talk about, as if people see it as a weakness. And just before we came on here, my background is in sports psychology, and I've had the pleasure of working with some of the greatest athletes to ever walk the face of the earth. I worked with the Arsenal football team for 2 years. I worked with Ronnie O'Sullivan, lots and lots of people. I don't say that to impress people, but just to impress upon people. When you ask athletes how much of the game is mental, they will tell you 80, 90% is what you do in your mind. Well, hang on, what about life? What about business? How much of that is mental and being able to deal with what is being thrown at people? So I don't think, as I've already said, there's never been a more important time to talk about mental health, talk about what can be done, and really equipping people to move forwards and have hope.
Absolutely. So let's in that vein, let's move forward. So we've talked a little bit about what's going on right now, but what are you seeing in the work that you do with some of these top athletes and business people alike? What are you seeing right now?
Well, many of the top athletes, I had athletes who were competing in the Olympics. That's not happening. But in terms of what's happening right now for so many people, is that definitely a feeling of uncertainty and a feeling of there's no clarity right now. So in terms of what's going on, well, uncertain times, right? I mean, how do you, I suppose you'd have to ask lots of people, but the people I ask, people are being asked to work from home. And I know organizations that the senior people said, oh, they'll be fine. They'll be fine working from home. And within a few weeks, they had a lot of senior people in the organization struggling because they didn't know how to switch off. They didn't know how to work from home because home isn't a place they would normally spend all of their time working. So there's definitely an environment going on where people are lost and they need help. Yeah,
and hence the importance of how are you when you're talking to people. So if this is a crisis that we're in right now, the visual that we've got on screen right now for you guys listening is after a crisis. So let's talk a little bit about that. It does feel like we're still within the crisis of the pandemic at the moment, but we're not going to be there forever, Pete, are we? So what happens after a crisis?
Well, first off, the word crisis in Japanese actually has two symbols. One means danger and the other one means opportunity. So I really do think there is an opportunity for new possibilities and new ways of thinking, new ways of working. But as we just said before, we presented to the NHS recently, some of the solutions that we have. I've actually been working with the NHS in Southampton. And yeah, I mean, for them, they don't think they're out of a crisis. They still think that there is. But as we mentioned previously, what's fascinating about a crisis is we definitely see the best in people in many cases. But after that, there's often a massive depression because people don't have anything to aim for. And I think that's what we should be aiming for. We should be aiming for better people, better organizations, more connected, more wanting to serve others and to make things better than they are right now.
So let me make sense of that, actually. If I heard you right, is what you're saying is once we get through the pandemic, actually potentially some of the mental fitness and well-being issues are going to rise to the surface then. So if we don't talk about it and deal with it now, potentially it could be far worse after the pandemic has passed.
It will be.
Will be, okay.
I've worked in the corporate world for over 25 years, right? And I can tell you, most companies are really just not that interested in people's well-being. They pay lip service to it. If you can create that culture of we genuinely care about how you think and how you feel, the greatest thing any human being can do, I believe, is to learn how to think greater than we feel. The world is full of people that because they feel something, they won't do something, or because they feel something, they won't perform as well. We know what people want. People want autonomy. They want to feel they're a part of something. People want to get better at things. They want mastery, and they want to feel they're a part of something that matters. And now with people being even more isolated, this stuff is so important. None of it is rocket science, but it's actually doing something about it as opposed to just paying lip service to it.
Okay, great. So we've got a quote here. I'm going to read it out again for people listening. Whatever the outlook, one thing is certain. When the economy is struggling, we're also more likely to struggle with mental health issues as depression and anxiety. From a Dr. Luke James from Bupa Global Medical Director. Give me a little bit more on this, Pete.
Well, Bupa is a company I know very well. They actually bought one of my health programs in 2003. We know that, look, people's self-worth is massively in connection with what they do. You know, I am what I do. And if that's under threat in some way, shape or form, that brings out a part of people which they don't want to show, you know, fear, worry, doubt, depression. We knew that prior to all of this, 800,000 people take their life every year, a very large percentage of that being male. We know that this is, I think it's only going to get worse, but there are solutions. You know, there are things that people can do.
Yeah, and hold that thought. We're going to come to some of the ways that we work with our clients in a little bit more. So here's some stats that we've got on screen here. Just if you can just talk to one or two of those for us.
Well, look, 78% of business leaders have experienced poor mental health during the pandemic. I mean, that kind of just says it all.
Yeah.
And 40% of adults reported the coronavirus was affecting their well-being. I mean, of course, because where there's uncertainty, that breeds stress, worry, doubt, anxiety. Look, I mean, we can paint the picture and say it's all doom and gloom, but the fact is there's still possibility. There's still hope. Hope is where you believe your future is where you are right now. And I personally do believe that, but we need agency, which is to empower people to create the future that they want. Yeah, and I think there is a lot of hope.
I think, you know, you often hear that term, hope is not a strategy. But without hope, what have we got? Well, not much. It's hopeless.
Well, there's a science of hope, which again, people don't know. You know, there's three elements of the science of hope. One is you believe your future is better than where you are. The second is agency, where you believe that you can have an effect on what's going on. And the third is pathways, which is if the path that you're on isn't working, well, there's plan B, there's plan C, there's plan D. Everyone can be hopeful, but often people need to be taught how to do that, especially with the agency element.
Yeah, I wonder how much of the first stat that you shared on here, 78% of business leaders have experienced poor mental health during the pandemic. I wonder what percentage of that 78% has actually done something about it.
Yeah, and probably not many.
So what now then, Pete? So we've got these stats. We've talked a little bit about some of the pressures that we're facing. How do we move forward positively?
Well, we need to be inspired, right? So inspiration is where you're breathing life into something that's better, that's in front of you, and everyone can do that. And I would be encouraging people and organizations to really stop and think about, okay, what do we want the legacy of what's going on to be? Who do we want to become as a business, as an organization, and the people in our business? How can we equip them to advance? And there for me lies, you know, the possibilities. And for companies, and I know a lot of companies are really struggling, but if they allocate some time and energy and resource to this, they could come out of this in a better place or more equipped to deal with new ways of doing business.
Absolutely. So we need to think then about resilience and give me your perspective of.
Yeah. Well, this is a subject that, you know, you and I are very passionate about, and that word resilience, you know, what it actually means is to recoil. You can't bounce back, you know, you can only move forwards. And resilience to me is where you become what some people might call being, you know, basically unbreakable. And again, people can learn how to do this. Otherwise, the alternative is you're just fragile and you kind of break. The other one is you can be, you know, fairly strong, but things do actually break you. Or you can teach people to be resilient, to almost embrace every obstacle that comes their way as fuel for their growth. And we see that people can be like this, but now is the time more than ever. Let's help people to be more resilient.
So let me pick up on a point that you've made there, because quite often I will hear, you know, oh, I'm not as resilient as X, Y, or Z person. What you said is actually you can teach resilience. How do you do that? How would you teach someone to be more resilient?
Well, that's where you've got to make them aware of their thought processes, right? So the issues that most of us have in our life is the narrative, right? Dr. Stephen Peters talks about it in the chimp paradox. I talk about it in my book, Shut the Duck Up. You know, the duck in the head, the quackery, the narrative, what we're saying to ourselves. What we say to ourselves produces feelings. Those feelings then often stop us in our tracks or can move us in a particular direction. Resilience in part has to do with awareness. And that's what people talk about mindfulness. You know, mindfulness isn't a technique. Mindfulness is an awareness of what is the experience like of being you, going back to that thing right in the beginning. How are you?
Yeah.
Becoming aware of what you're saying to yourself. How is that affecting you? And you can't pay lip service to that, you know, because if you do, you can do yourself more harm than good.
Okay. So in order to be more resilient, actually, you've got to work with yourself.
Yeah. And that's where often it's good to work with other people or have a culture where people, like here, you see this picture here, people sitting around a table talking about that growth mindset, talking about getting better, because ultimately that's the only thing that we're here to do, right? To grow, to advance. It's just that, Matt, you know, you and I and everyone else have been given this dignity of choice, and that this habit thing that we are what we repeatedly do, or we are what we repeatedly think. But human beings can adapt, they can evolve, they can get better.
Yeah, and I think one of the well-known stories around growth mindset or marginal gains and progressiveness was the 2012 British cycling team, where they did those little tiny things, take their own pillows to training camps, don't pass hand sanitizer without sanitizing your hands, which of course we all do now, but back then, and people would think, well, why would you do that? Because these little things, when they add up, they enable you to do great things, and they ward off the illnesses.
It's the compound effect, and that's where a lot of people just don't realize. If you create that culture where you help people develop habits, especially when they don't feel like doing things, then eventually those habits end up changing the landscape of everything, because people then have those habits installed.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about this. And again, for you listening in, we've got a visual here. Question is, how do we increase our well-being? How are we going to do that, Pete?
For me, there's only one way of doing that, and that's through coaching. You know, coaching is where you work out where someone is, you work out where they want to go, and you support them in that process, because no one can give you well-being. It's something you have to practice yourself. But, you know, any athlete that wants to perform better, they get coaching, right? So that's what we do. That's what we give people, the solutions that they can learn and apply in their own time, so they can own this for us is what it's all about. We want people to own their development, because if they own it, it's theirs. They're not going to, very unlikely to give something up that's yours.
Lasting habits, things that will sustain for years to come.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's what we have. We have this ability to formulate habits. Most of us have habits which don't serve us. And this is what we do. You know, we have put together a productivity app where we can teach these in classes to people that they can digest when they want to, so they can learn and apply. It's all very well learning about mindfulness. Oh, that's nice. No. Learning without application is just a waste of time. So what we do, if we created something that people can start, they can go through a class. It's not complicated. They can apply things around building habits, building confidence. Confidence actually is about learning to trust yourself. And so we've put together a series of masterclasses that they can immerse themselves in and learn and evolve, create habits, and build better people, build better organizations.
I like the point that you made there around, because I'm sure we all know people who read endlessly and they've got lots of theory, but then don't do enough with it. And there's a great quote by Cialdini, or Dr. Robert Cialdini, and he said that a theorist is best described as someone who assumes everything except responsibility. And I like that, because actually, if we think about what we need to practice with well-being, with mental fitness, with anything that we do, whether we're trying to get fitter or trying to improve our capability, you don't do it by reading something. You need to do something by doing something, and trying and failing and succeeding. How have you experienced that sort of flow, Pete, when you've been working with people, you know, at elite level or whatever?
It's about systems, right? So you look at any organization and the jobs that people do, there are systems, there are ways, there are processes, and it's exactly the same with well-being. systems, processes. They need to be applied. Some people think it's boring, doing certain things every single day, but they don't have to take up all day, every day. But if done over time, what might seem mundane leads to the sublime, because people want to be better. They want to feel better. They want to feel that they are evolving. And if you have a culture where that isn't present, the culture can often be, oh, this is just who we are. This is how we move through the world. But ultimately, there's an unhappiness that exists in people because they know they are not being who they're capable of being. And Abraham Maslow, who is a very humanistic psychologist, said that what man can be, he must be. We must be better, but we've got to show people how to do it. And that's what we do.
Okay, great. And it's worth pointing out, I'm going to come back to that slide in a moment. It's worth pointing out that when you are trying to change habits or behaviors, it's not a light switch. It doesn't happen overnight. It has to happen by a repeated cadence of behaviors. Can you just explain a little bit about why the support options have been built this way?
Well, what we've done is created a series of masterclasses, and some of these might be more of use to some organizations, depending where that organization is right now, where its pain points are. But in order to learn something, it takes time. It doesn't take forever, but it takes time to install habits. People used to say it was 21 days or something. In fact, that research came from NASA, and it was about 40 days. But everyone is different. But if you can create an environment and a culture where people are learning together, you can learn fast, right? And once you've learned something fast, you've installed it. It then becomes who you are and what you do. And that's what we want to do here, more and more with organizations, more people flourishing because of who they've become, because of what they've learned how to do.
And this is underpinned by group coaching, because here's the spoiler alert: when we try new things, they don't always work well first time. So talk to me a little bit about the importance of those group coaching sessions.
Well, it's just that environment of people being able to share what they've learned. We always ask the questions: what went well, what needs work, and what are you going to do to get better? As you create that growth mindset and help people deal with failure or difficulty or adversity in a way where they almost start to welcome it, because they know that that's going to be fuel for their growth. And that then comes back to the resilience piece. That's what resilience is. People have the capacity to do it, but let's face it, most of us were never taught how to do that. Most of us have been brought up just to get by and just do the right thing. But those days are gone. We now have to evolve to be better human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just two more visuals to share. So we've got some words on the screen now, and some of the words I'm going to read out for you guys listening: confidence, focus, happier, calmer, grateful, positive. I mean, these are all in the positive tense anyway, Pete, but where did these words come from?
Well, these come from people that have been through this process with us. We ask people to give us words that gave an overview of how they felt. And look at that, another keyword that comes out to me: unstoppable. That's what you want. People like, nothing can stop me. And I'm very proud of what we've been able to do with people, but we've only just got started. And as you know, we are looking for organizations that really already are interested in their people, but they want to take that to another level, because there's always another level, right? And I could talk about this till the cows come home. I'm not actually sure where that expression comes from, Matt, but the reality that we can deliver this to people wherever they are in the world, on their devices, in their time. And it's a very exciting time.
Let me, just before we go on to the sort of wrap up for this chat today, let me ask you a question. I don't know whether you've been asked this very often, but when you're working with people, what motivates you, Pete? What really what gives you the satisfaction that what you're doing is working?
That's a great question. And I think the answer that came to mind there is where you're supporting people in living life by design. A great life doesn't happen by chance, right? You can't leave it to chance. It happens by design. And when you can help people do that, so they own it, and then you meet these people or you have some interaction with them, it's theirs. You didn't do it for them. They did it. And that's the greatest joy. And as you see, as it says on the slide here, your future is unwritten. I believe all our futures are unwritten. And even if they were written, who would want to read it? I wouldn't want to read it. And we've all got this power to do something about it. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to continue to empower people to create better futures.
So before anybody does anything, your offer, you're happy to have a chat, a conversation about what's going on now, where you are, where you want to be.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't like an approach that there's no one way, right? With any organization, we're happy to talk to them about where exactly are you right now, diagnose their current situation and work out where it is they want to go and what are the classes, what is the specific coaching that needs to be in place in order to get them to where they want to be. And, with coaching, what we see is often people get to where they want to go a lot quicker.
Yeah, which is good. So for you guys listening, Pete.Cohen at petecohen.co.uk. If you want to get in touch with Pete, of course, go to mentorgroup.co.uk to learn more. And from this conversation, if you can take one marginal gain away, what would it be?
Marginal gains is where the magic is. It's the compounding effect. As you just said before, if I said to everyone listening here, I will give you £5 million in cash right now, or I'll give you a penny a day and double it every day. Which one would you take? Well, the most important question to ask with that first off is, well, how many days? Because if it was 28 days, you wouldn't want to, you'd want to take the 5 million, right? But if it was 31 days, you'd have close to $11 million, and that's, or pounds, thank you. That's the power of the marginal gain, that keep going. That's what we have to do, install habits of success. So Matt, thank you so much, for giving me this opportunity to share this with people, because this is big.
It's always your passion, isn't it, Pete? And you want to make a difference. That's what this is all about. We all need to know what our own marginal gains are. If you've taken something from this podcast which has been useful for you, then that motivates Pete and I every single day of our lives. So Pete, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time out. And have you got one final message you'd like to leave for our podcast listeners and viewers?
It just comes back to that whole thing about hope. Have hope. Believe that your future is better than where you are right now, because without that, there's hopelessness. So let's go out there, and as Gandhi said, let's be the change that we want to see in this world. Thank you, Gandhi.
A perfect way to end the chat. Thank you for taking the time out. Stay safe, and we'll see you again on another chat with Matt very, very soon. Thank you. Thanks, Pete.
Pleasure.